Today, we're going to dive into one of the world's most powerful, profitable, and, let's be honest, controversial industries, the global arms trade. This is a business that truly shapes our world, from sparking conflicts to building alliances, and it operates on a scale that is just mind-boggling.
And when I say mind-boggling, I mean it. We're talking about a massive, multi-billion-dollar enterprise. But it's really a business with two faces. On one side, you have the formal, legal transfers of incredibly advanced military gear between governments. And on the other, you have the dangerous, shadowy world of the illicit black market.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down in this explainer. First, we'll nail down what the arms trade actually is. Then, we'll look at the biggest players out there. After that, we'll get into the business side of war, dig into all the controversy, and finally, we'll check out the attempts to regulate the whole thing.
All right, first things first. What exactly are we talking about when we say the arms trade? Let's get a clear definition.
Okay, so at its very core, the arms trade is just the international buying and selling of military equipment. But the key thing to remember is that it operates in two completely different worlds at the same time. There are the official, legal, above-board sales between countries, and then there's that murky underworld of illegal trade that involves everyone from governments to small groups and even individuals.
Now, when most of us hear arms trade, this is probably what comes to mind. These are the 7 big categories of conventional arms as laid out by the United Nations. You know, the big ticket items, the expensive, high-tech stuff like battle tanks, fighter jets, warships, and powerful missile systems. And yeah, these are the weapons that cost billions of dollars. But does that make them the deadliest? It's a really important question to ask. What kinds of weapons are actually responsible for the most deaths and conflicts all over the globe?
And you know what? The answer is probably not what you think. It's not the jets or the tanks, it's these. Small arms and light weapons, or SAL for short. They might not be the priciest part of the trade, not by a long shot, but they are responsible for the vast majority of casualties in wars and conflicts worldwide.
So let's move on and see who the biggest players are in this global market. Who's doing all the buying and selling?
Well, it turns out the export market is really dominated by just a few countries. The United States is way out in front, responsible for 39% of the world's total. Russia's a distant second at 20%. So think about that. Together, just those two countries account for almost 60% of all the arms sold on the planet.
And this is where a pretty deep irony comes into play. If you add France, China, and the UK into that top group of exporters, their combined market share jumps to a massive 76%. And what do those 5 countries have in common? They are the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, the very group that's supposed to be maintaining international peace.
So, where's all this hardware going? Well, for the US, the #1 customer is Saudi Arabia. For Russia, it's India. These trade relationships are a huge deal. They often map right onto geopolitical alliances. Now, you'll see the value here is listed as TIV. That's not dollars, it stands for Trend Indicator Value. It's basically a clever way researchers measure the volume of military gear being moved rather than its exact price tag. So it gives us a better sense of the actual military power being transferred.
Of course, it's not just countries, it's corporations. And American companies absolutely dominate this space. We're talking giants like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing. Just to give you an idea of the scale, in 2021 alone, Lockheed Martin's arms sales were over $60 billion. These aren't just the biggest arms companies, they're some of the biggest companies in the world, full stop.
Which brings us to a really crucial point, the connection between governments and these private companies. So for our next section, let's unpack the business of war and see how this partnership really works.
It's a super tight relationship, and it pretty much works in 4 main ways. First, states pump taxpayer money into the industry through subsidies for research and development. Second, they literally give loans to other countries specifically so they can buy their weapons. The US, for instance, had a program for this worth over $5 billion back in 2019. Third, governments are the ones who grant the official export licenses. Without one, no legal sale can happen. And finally, governments often act like salesmen, directly promoting and managing arms deals abroad.
So when you have this tight of a relationship between government and industry, and the product is literally designed to be lethal, yeah, it's no surprise this is a deeply controversial business. Let's dig into the arguments on both sides of this debate.
Okay, so the supporters argue that the arms trade can help create a balance of power in a region. They say it upholds a nation's right to self-defense and that it's a legitimate industry that creates jobs and boosts the economy. But the arguments against are powerful. Critics say it creates a built-in interest in having more conflicts, that weapons can easily end up in the wrong hands, that they're often used to commit human rights abuses, and that it can trap buying nations in a dangerous cycle of dependency.
And one of the biggest arguments against the arms trade can be summed up with one very chilling word: blowback.
So what is blowback? It's the ultimate unintended consequence. It's when weapons you sell to a friendly nation or group are later used against you or your allies. The textbook example of this is the weapons that were supplied to fighters in Afghanistan back in the 80s, which later fell into the hands of groups like the Taliban. And a related problem is something called diversion. That's when legally sold weapons get stolen or diverted to the black market. Like when 500,000 government weapons were looted in Albania and ended up fueling crime all across Europe.
Now, with stakes this high, you have to imagine people have tried to get this trade under control. So for our last section, let's look at the major efforts to regulate this massive global business.
And they have. Over the years, there have been several big international treaties. You have the 1980 Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, and then the really important 1997 Ottawa Treaty, which banned anti-personnel landmines. But the biggest, most comprehensive attempt by far came in 2013 with the Arms Trade Treaty, or ATT.
The ATT is a really big deal. It's an attempt to create a single global standard for how arms are bought and sold. It requires countries to set up their own control systems, and, this is huge, it prohibits them from selling weapons to regimes that are likely to commit serious human rights abuses. It also makes them take steps to stop weapons from being diverted to criminals and terrorists, and they have to report all their imports and exports every year.
And this all leads us to the big, thorny question at the very heart of this entire debate. It's a question that pits national security and economic interests against fundamental human rights. Should arms sales only be legal if the country buying them has a clean human rights record? That's the central dilemma of the global arms trade, and it's definitely something to think about.